Hi, my name is Roberto Serini. I'm a photographer based in New York City and in Milan, Italy. My main areas are fashion, advertising, portrait, and lifestyle. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you the steps I take to touch up a portrait. So the image we're going to work on is this one. First thing we do is right click, open with Adobe Photoshop, and automatically the image is open in Camera Raw. Really all I do in Camera Raw is adjust my white balance. Now I usually shoot using a check card for my white balance that I can go back to and then I can use to calibrate my colors, but unless you really need to have color accuracy, you don't have to worry about it. So at this point I use the picker up here on top. I pick my background since it's a whitish gray color. See how that does. I like it, but I want to make the image a little warmer. So up here I'm going to check on the white. I'm going to go to the white balance and change the temperature and bump it up a little bit until I get roughly where I want to be. So about there. So next we're going to open the image. Down here, open image. Here we go. So the first step that I like to do in Photoshop is I'm going to duplicate the first layer. And to do so, you just drag it to the little paper with a corner folded. That's one way to do it. We can turn off the original layer. The reason I do this is because as I work, I like sometimes to go back and check against the original. And I also, if there's something, it's easy to go too far. So if I want to put a mask and bring back some of the original details, I have the original layer right there. So the next step, if I have to do any liquify, I would do it here. In this case, I really don't need to. So we'll proceed into frequency separation. You can find plenty of tutorials on how to set up frequency separation. Here, I'll show you the way I do it. So I have this layer, I make another copy of it. Turn off the top one, the bottom we're going to call it low frequency. The top one, so the bottom is low frequency, the top one is high frequency. On the low frequency, I'm going to apply a Gaussian blur. So we go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur, and usually I apply it to the point where some of the details start to disappear, but we definitely don't want to go to this point. We want to still able to see what the picture, but just fuzzy out some of the details. This part is sort of trial and error. Eventually you'll get the hang of it, but as you can see, we've gotten rid of the sharpness of the image. So I say okay. Now I turn back on my high frequency. Now for 16-bit images, which this is 16-bit, after we select the high frequency, we go to Image, Apply Image. For source, we leave it the way it is. Layer, we want to select low frequency. We then want to click on invert. We want to add, so select the blending mode to add. And here we want 2 and 0 for scale and offset. And that should be it. So when we go OK, this is what we've got. And now we want to change the high frequency blending mode down here of that layer to linear light. So linear light. So the magic of this is that now it looks like we haven't done anything. So now I select both layers and I drag them to the folder so I can put them in a folder. We call this frequency separation. There we go. The next step is above the low frequency. I will add a blank layer, and I'll show you why in a minute. And then I will take my high frequency layer and I will duplicate it one more time. Then I will take on the top one and I will apply a mask. And the mask, I will fill it with black, which means that I am not going to, so content, okay, see foreground, perfect. So when you fill a mask with black, you're basically saying, I don't want to see the layer. White means you're going to see what that layer does to the rest of the image. So by filling it with black, this layer virtually becomes invisible. The reason I do this, and we're going to rename this layer eyes, is that I found, and a lot of this is trial and error, but I found that with when you duplicate the high frequency layer, you can get some really good details on the eyes. Now, one thing, I do use a Wacom tablet. I do find it very helpful. It's not necessary. I know plenty of retouchers that don't use it, but I find it just helps me. So we're going to pick white down here for our, and we're going to use a brush with an opacity of 100 and flow of 100, and there we go. So as you can see, a lot of detail comes out in the eye. Now, I usually turn this down to about 90, 85, 90%, depending. But you can already see when you look at the eye, the difference. Oops, sorry. How much difference that makes. So we're done with that. Now, in high, I like to start with high frequency. The high frequency layer allows you to get rid of blemishes without affecting the color too much. So I go to the stamp tool, hit S on the keyboard, fairly feathered, soft, opacity and flow 100%, and I start to go around the photo, all the blemishes, and here we go. Now I'm going to go fairly fast on this tutorial, and I may not get all of them because I'm just trying to give you the gist of it. So here we go. Got one here, and these are just normal blemishes now that most people have. One important thing is that we don't want to take too much out of underneath the eye, because in a lot of cases when you see that, that's when it looks really fake, because we all have creases under our eyes, and if we take it completely out, it gives you what a lot of people call the doll look, so it looks too fake. Now around the mouth, I'm going to soften these. We're going to soften right there. The lips, we're going to clone next to it. That's too much, so I'm going to change the opacity to 50%. And we're going to do the same just to kind of soften that so it's not so harsh. So go back to 100% on my opacity, fix down here. Let's see if we can fix that. Perfect. And the high frequency layer, you'll find as you play with it, does also sometimes help with some of the colors. They're not both, the high and low frequency don't completely separate. At least I've never been able to get them to 100% separate, but it does help quite a bit. So let's see here. We do want to soften a little bit under the eye, so I'm going to go to a 40% opacity. Come from there, go like this. There we go. Beautiful, perfect, same as over here. Now, the coloring is still there, but we have removed some of the normal wrinkles, quote unquote, in the skin. Not really wrinkles, she's beautiful, she has flawless skin. But again, everybody has a little bit of creases under the eyes, so I've reduced them a little bit. Next, I'm going to go to the low frequency with a stamp, and here I usually like to go on opacity of about 10-15%. Again, soft brush, and we're going to try here to smooth out the color. So what we want to do is we want to lighten this area. So I changed my brush mode to lighten so that it will not affect the light areas. I'm going to pick the lighter areas, and then a little bit at a time I'm going to tap in that area. Okay, just like so. Same thing over here. Perfect. And as I mentioned before, what I like to do, I keep that original layer so we can, since we put everything in a folder, we can turn on and off the folder. So let's turn back on the background layer, which you can leave it on, but it's a personal preference, so we can go the difference. We can already start seeing significant difference under the eyes. We have smoothed things out. We are also going to smooth out different colors of the skin right here. So again, we're on lighten mode. We're going to pick that lighter pink, and we're going to go through here and smooth out some of the colors. There we go. That's definitely helping. Now this layer that we created above the low frequency layer, something interesting that I found with low frequency is that I can go into this layer, go to the brush tool, go down to about 20% opacity, and with a soft brush I can clone, and to clone it's the Alt key or Option key on a Mac, and I can find areas that I like to, I want to clone that area, so I'm going to check, go right here and pick that skin color, and then just paint. You got to be careful, you don't want to go too far, like I just did, and paint that color over it, but it paints it in a way that it still blends with the skin, because okay, so that one is a little too light, because we are still within the frequency separation process, so we're not affecting the texture. So I'm going to pick a little darker color. I'm going to try with, nope, that's really bad. So, and again, this is trial and error. This is the beauty of doing this. Actually, you know what? I'm going to leave it the way it is. Let's see. Yeah, so the one cool thing is that because it's just a blank layer, you can then switch over to the eraser tool if you want to. Change my opacity to, actually it's already on 10%. Very softly, if I think I've gone too much, and very softly brush over what I did, erase some of those brush marks. I think I'm okay with that. Let's see. Yeah, I like that. We're going to go back later and do some other stuff to get some of that color back. So let's see the neck. So we go back to the high frequency, go back to the stamp tool, 100% opacity. We want to change this back to normal mode because now we're back on the high frequency. And actually I'm going to go down to 50%. So I hit the number 5 on my keyboard, and that will automatically change the opacity to 50%. And I'm going to again smooth out some of these normal lines because she has her neck turned. And one thing also to remember or to keep in mind is that I'm using a 5DS. The 5DS camera by Canon is a 50 megapixel camera, so it captures an incredible amount of detail that some cameras, other cameras don't. So you may not even see some of these details. Another thing I want to do, I like to do, is that if she's not wearing an earring, I will clean up the hole. So again, high frequency, still in the high frequency layer, stamp, 100% opacity, just clone around, and there we go. And while we're at it, let's just clean that. So here we go. Now, I do see here a change in the color. Here's something interesting that you can do. If you go on the low frequency layer, go to your lasso tool, right up here, the lasso. And if I select, on the low frequency, if I select an area between the two, not between, but that overlaps both the two areas, so I do that, then I hit the Q key that shows my selection, turns on the mask. Then I go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. I blur it out so we don't get a line around us, so we get a little bit smoother transition, about right there. Say OK, hit Q again, and now, leaving that selected, if I go back to Blur, Gaussian Blur, voila. See what it did? It smoothed out this whole area. Quite frankly, don't ask me why it works that way, but it works, so I'm happy. So let's do that again. Like in this area, we want to smooth that out. There's some lines, so we go Q, Blur, Gaussian Blur, up a little bit more, okay, Q again, Gaussian Blur, and there we go. Now understand, the first time after you do the selection and you hit Q, the reason you're doing a blur is that first blur blurs out the edges of your selection, so it makes it more better transition, so it's not a harsh transition. And then the second blur is the actual blurring of that area. Same thing over here. Let's see if we can get it done. And you do have to be careful, because if you get too close to sharp edges, it will affect the sharp edges. So like right here, this may not work, so we may have to find a different way of doing it. Let's see. No, that worked. So I like what that has done, because if we see the difference, we have really smoothed that out. Now, I'm still not really happy with this area. It's too light, too white. So I'm going to try again. Go back to this layer 1 that's above the low frequency layer. Go back to my brush tool. Opacity 22%. Actually, let's go down to an opacity of about 13%. And let's see now if I select, using again the Alt Option key, sample right there. Let's bring in some color. There we go, just gently painting. So let's see. Yeah, I kind of like it. Maybe it's a little too dark now. No, actually I'm okay. Yeah, it is a little dark, but so we'll go back to the eraser tool. So we go back to the eraser tool, and again we're on 10% soft brush, and we're going to erase some of what we have done, kind of blend it in a little bit better. Okay. Now, I do see changes in the skin color here, so let's do it differently. Let's change the brush. Let's go back to brush, and let's change its mode to darken instead of lighten. So I'm going to zoom out, and the way I zoom out, I hold the Z key. So when you click on the Z, then you can hold the Alt option and click, and that will zoom out. If you let go, you zoom in. So back to the brush tool. Select some of the dark areas, and let's see if we can smooth some of that skin. There we go. Definitely improved it. Made it more uniform. And I always work with really good makeup artists as well, but there are times where you know, you don't catch some of those things, and you do have to fix them in post. Now, Something I want to fix is this area right above the lip. So I went back to high frequency, stamp 100%, and we're going to pick from there and smooth that out. Yes, I do like that. I don't like this hue color, how it goes from darker to lighter right there. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my low frequency. Again, go to my lasso tool. Select between the two, and let's see if we can smooth that with the same technique. Blur, Gaussian blur. No, sorry, forgot to hit the Q first. And blur, Gaussian blur. Let's see. Right there, okay. Q again. Gaussian blur. Preview. Yes, and then you do Command D on the Mac to get rid of the selection. So do we like that? There we go. Now, the next step, so we have all of this, is I'm closing that layer. Well, actually, sorry, the group. So the next step is we select everything in that group, and we do a right click or on the Mac Control, and we do merge layers. So now we've merged it all down to one single layer. The reason I do this because I can go back and do a new frequency separation later if I want to, and we probably will. But now I have this layer all the way down to just one layer. We then are going to do dodge and burn. To dodge and burn, we add a layer, blank layer. We then do an edit, fill. Contents is 50% gray, okay. We change the blending mode of that layer to overlay. And with Photoshop, when you do that with 50% gray, it basically you can't see that layer anymore. But the nice thing of it is that now we can do things like dodging and burning on that layer, and it will affect the rest of the photo, but it is non-destructive because it's by itself on that layer. So first thing is burn. I'm usually around 10%, but you know, play with it, set on midtones, and I'm going to evaluate, and protect tones. We got to keep that turned on. And I'm going to accentuate this area. That's a little too much. Let's go back. Actually, I'm going to change my exposure down to 3%. So let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit more right there. I then like to add a little bit above the eye, not too much, just a little bit. Then a little bit under the lip, so that adds a little fullness to the mouth. And then, in this case, we do have eyeliner. I'm going to bump this up to about 20%, get my brush very small. And I'm going to follow around the eye like so, just to add a little bit. There we go. Very subtle. So the difference is a very subtle difference, but I think it does add some impact to the photo. Okay, we're happy with this. The next step, let's see here. We're gonna have to clean up some of these hair. Okay, so why don't we do that up here? So we want to clean up some of this hair. Way I do it, so we're going to select, let's actually, actually turn off this layer for now. We're going to select our frequency separation layer. We're going to duplicate it. We're going to call this one low frequency. We're going to call this one high frequency. And mind you, yes, we could have done this in the previous steps, but it's not necessary. You can just keep doing it over and over and over. Sometimes I like to just take a step back. So we go to the low frequency. Again, kind of blur it out. About right there, looks good. Turn the high frequency back on. Add image, apply image. Select low frequency. It remembers what we did the last time. So again, blending mode is add, scale 2, offset 0, opacity 100%, invert. Okay. Change that to linear light. Again, select both of them, drag them to the folder, create a folder. Let's call it again frequency separation. So now let's go and see what we can do about that hair. So again, stamp tool here, 100% opacity, kind of a middle softness brush. We're going to start selecting and painting over that. Now, because it is frequency separation, we are mostly right now just removing the texture of the hair, not the color. It's going to leave the hair color there, as you can see. So now we need to go back and fix the hair color. We go to do that with the low frequency. We go to the stamp, we stay on the stamp tool, go down to about 20%, very soft brush, and I like to zoom out because it's easier for me to see it. We're going to sample right in this area and touch it up like so, gently, a little bit at a time, and there we go. We fixed that hair. It's gone, and it did a fairly good job. We got a clean. We got one right there. So go back to the high frequency, stamp, opacity at 100%. Let's fix that. Perfect. No, actually, right there. Let's get rid of that. There we go. I'm happy with that. So I'm actually, while I'm at it, I am going to clean up some more of this. And this is very personal, how much you want to spend on cleaning up. You know, it depends on the photo too. I mean, if it's a portrait, usually you don't need to I mean, we don't want to spend ton of hours, especially because again, it is not going to be printed this big, but it will, you know, if you print it, this is about the size, you know, I mean, you know, 8.5 by 11, so there you're not going to see a lot of the details. Now I don't like, there's a hue here, I'm noticing it here and there, so I'm going to go back to low frequency. I'm going to pick my lasso tool, pick L, I'm going to select there, there, and there. Q. Oh, and don't worry about this little hook, because by the time we put the blur on it, the blur will get rid of that for me, because blur about that much. Okay. Q again, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Okay. And I like that. Yes, that really smoothed it. Same thing on this side. Q, Gaussian blur. Okay, no, oof. See what I was saying earlier, this time we got really close to here, so we got to make sure that we don't lose that detail. So we'll find out. So hit Q, blur, Gaussian blur. Okay, it's not affecting it, so we're okay. There we go. Another thing I just noticed is right in this area, I want to try to smooth that out a little bit, that transition. So Q, blur, Gaussian blur. Okay, cute. Gaussian blur. There we go. So I am worried because it is affecting this area. You can see it. But what we're going to do, so we're going to say okay, not worry about it. But then on this frequency separation folder, you can apply a mask. It's a white mask, so that means that you can see what this folder is doing. We're going to get a brush. We're going to get a black brush. And we're going to paint. So I am going to go to 100% mode normal. And I'm going to paint the eye right back in. So we get our detail back. So we can see we brought our detail back on the eye. Now, I do still want to fix right in this area. So go back to low frequency, L for lasso, right there, Q, blur, Gaussian blur. Actually, I'm gonna do a Control Z, I'm gonna go back. That's too much blur, so let me bring it back in a little bit, be a little bit more focused onto that area. Okay, Q, filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and we are now, I think, happy. Yes. So here's our difference. So we can really see the difference now. Now let's turn back on our dodge right there. And I am pretty happy with this. Now, if you wanted to smooth the skin a little bit more, which I don't think it's necessary, but what we could do is, so let's take our frequency separation, select those. Actually, if you select the folder all the way down, like this, you can do a merge layers, and it will just merge including the mask. So you're down to just the frequency separation. So as I was saying, what we can do to smooth it even more, we can run frequency separation again. So duplicate, and I did a Command J on the Mac to duplicate that layer, or again you can take it and drag it to this icon down here. This is low frequency, and again all these steps you can do them all the first time you do the frequency separation, but sometimes I notice things that I hadn't seen before as I work through it, so I go back and do it. So low frequency, again blur, Gaussian blur, there we go, detail's good. So what I'm going to do now, I'm not actually going to do it to this photo, but I'll show you the process to do a little bit more smoothing if you wanted to. So high frequency, image, apply image, it remembers. Oh, interesting thing. See what it's doing right there? That's because when we created, when we did the mask earlier, that group, we had a mask. So we have to be able to, it's still showing you this original layer, the background layer that we kept from the beginning. See? So what we need to do is we need to delete the high, so we're gonna go step backwards. We're gonna keep stepping backwards until we get back to that first, there we go, to this layer. Because what we need to do is we need to merge it with the one below. So I'm gonna click the background. I'm going to duplicate it because again, I don't wanna lose that original layer. So now we have these two, we're going to select them together, right click, merge layers. Now we're good to go. So here's another thing that I like to do. So now let's do this. Let's call it, Let's call it phase 1, just to keep it as this is what we have done so far. So let's duplicate that and we can turn it off. But at least if we do something that we don't like, we can always go back to this original, to this point in the process. So we're going to take this one, we're going to duplicate it one more time. This one is going to be low frequency, high frequency. Turn up to this Gaussian blur. Oops. And a little bit more. There we go. Good. That is apply. It remembers. No. So see what it's doing. By default, it's looking at phase 1 layer, which is that layer, but we actually want to select the low frequency. So layer, we're going to change it to low frequency. There we go. And you can tell because when you do this, you should see something that resembles, you know, just basically the image, very sharp, or a gray with like just the details, you know, of the sharp edges of the image. So we're going to say OK. Change it over to linear light. Again, select the two, high and low, drag it down to the folder, create a folder, and we're going to rename it again. Freak SEP. Title typing. We know what that means. So one way that you can do this to smooth the skin a little bit more, you can go into the high frequency layer and you can apply a Gaussian blur to that layer. Now don't worry about some of these details because we'll paint them out, but look at the areas where you want to smooth the skin. Like for instance, okay, so preview. Let's say we want to smooth out these lines on the neck. So there we go. You say OK. Now you say, well, the whole image is not sharp. I don't care because I go to the folder, I put a mask. I fill the mask with black. So that would be my foreground color in this case. And now it's going to ignore, sorry, we need to have this one on. It's going to ignore what anything inside of this folder is doing and showing me what this layer is doing, which is the layer that we created as a sum of everything we have done up to now. The reason I do that is because now we can go onto this mask and we'll zoom into the area we want it to affect. We go get a brush. We get an opacity of maybe, oh, I don't know, 40%, 39%, soft brush. And with white now, so we change to white down here, we can paint in just this area of the layer of that folder, I mean, that affects there. So while we're at it, why don't we just do a little bit here. There we go. And that's another way to smooth out the skin. So without it, with it. Can you tell the difference? I hope so, but it should be also very subtle. It should be a very subtle difference. So let's see here. I think I'm pretty happy with this image. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate this one more time, the phase 1, because I want to keep it to that point. Actually, we don't need to do this, so Control Z, because as I mentioned, I am not going to keep this layer. I just wanted to show you that you can smooth a little bit more. I'm not going to keep this group, so I'm going to delete that group because I'm happy the way it is. So what we're going to do, because of those lines, those things on the neck, it's normal because she's starting her head, and it doesn't bother me because you will never see that level of detail. So now we're going to add a blank layer at the top. So at the very top, by clicking the insert layer, we're going to get a stamp tool, the clone tool. I'm going to change the sample to current and below. So the great thing about this is that we can now start cloning in the image non-destructively. So this does not affect the rest of, I mean, it does not affect the actual image. It's on a separate layer. So at the end, if we don't like it, we can always delete it. So stamp 100%. I am going to start getting rid of some of this hair. Kind of clean up this area. Like that. There we go. So and for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going pretty fast. Usually I take a little bit more time than this, but I'm just trying to show you the technique that I use. So, like in this area, you can see that there's hair between the eyelashes. Again, it depends how much time you want to spend on this. You will probably never notice that, but if it's a beauty shot and it's a tight close-up, then you will notice this, so you want to clean it. So we're going to keep going down. Here we're going to get rid of all of this. Be careful not to affect the actual skin. There we go. Zoom in here. Now there's something else you can do here, which I like to usually do, and that is I'm going to switch over to the pen tool, and I am going to create a little bit of a mask here. Follows her face, so that I can actually, and then you can hold down Control, click on that, make selection, 0.3 is good enough. What that does, it limits where the stamp tool affects, so that if I can be a little bit more, I don't have to be as accurate, if you will. So here we go. Now, one thing I don't like about it, as you can see, is that there's natural, the edge there is a little too hard compared to the rest of the face. So there's a couple of ways of fixing that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a mask on this layer. I'm going to get a brush. So the white mask, I'm going to choose black. I'm going to go opacity 100%, soft brush, and I'm going to paint in along that edge. Now obviously it's going to bring some of that in, so I'm going to switch over to the white, not obviously, but the way I did it, it did that. So I'm going to go ahead and be very gentle on how I take some of that out, trying not to affect the edge and make it too sharp. I like that, because I mean, yes, there's a little bit there, but you can't really see it. I mean, if you really wanted to, you could. So still with white, you can actually go in there and kind of smooth that out a little bit more. Just got to be careful, because then you end up back to where you started with too sharp of an edge. But let's see here. I'm okay with that. Alrighty. So the next step, so I'm not going to really do anything. Oh, I guess we can. So let's go back to this layer. Select the layer. Oops, double click that. Select that layer. Select back to the stamp tool, 100%. And let's fix some of this flyaway hair. So fixing there, there. I mean, and this is all very subjective. It depends how much time you want to spend, and if you really feel like it's taken away from the photo or not. I'm not going to really spend too much more time on it as far as the hair, because you get the point. You just clone and you start working that. So what's next? I do want to clean it up from the jacket though. So again, same layer. We're going to keep going. Oops. too out of hand there on that. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and work that in. So like that, like that. The other thing you can do is you can use, if you click J, which is this tool, which is your Band-Aid, you can see if Photoshop will take care of it for you, and it won't, of course, because it can't see underneath. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Okay, so okay, so after doing all of this, let's see, I'm going to add a curves, oops, not exposure. All right, a curves layer. And I'm going to add a little bit of contrast to the image by creating an S curve, like so. Let's see, there we go, and then maybe pull back on the opacity just a little bit. We don't want it too in your face, but I do like what that does. I want to add a little bit of saturation, so I'm going to go to vibrance saturation. I'm going to actually add a little bit of vibrance and a touch of saturation. You don't want to go too far. Let's see, is that too much? I don't mind it too much. I think it adds a little too much red, so we're going to go to hue saturation. Actually, no. We are going to go to selective color, pick on the red, and we're going to pull back on the black. Let's see. I like that, but then I'm going to put, there's a mask on there that automatically Photoshop puts on there. Oh, I double clicked, sorry, so cancel. So I'm going to go on the mask. I'm going to get a brush, black brush, because I don't want to lose the vividity, I don't know if that's a word, of the color where the makeup actually is, because that kind of affected this area. So I'm going to paint it back in where the lips are and above the eye. So like this. There we go. I like that. So next, I'm going to select all of my layers, and I'm going to, well, actually what we're going to do next, before we do that, we are going to make a duplicate of the phase 1 layer, because again, it's a good step. I want to keep it. But we're going to select all of these layers, and we are going to merge them. We are then going to duplicate this merged layer. We are going to change it to a black and white layer, so it's image adjustment, desaturate. We are then going to go filter, other, high pass, because we're going to use this to sharpen our image. I find usually around 3 to 4, maybe 5 is where I like to be. I kind of want to see just some of the details when you see it in this view. I'm going to put OK. And then change the mode of that layer to overlay. And that gives it added sharpness, which you can see when I zoom in. Now, obviously on the skin, we probably don't want the added sharpness. So I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to, the usual, put my mask on it. The mask is white, so you're seeing everything. I'm going to get a brush, black brush, and I'm going to paint away over the skin so that we don't have sharpness, because we actually went in, cleaned it up, and when you start sharpening the skin, you're defeating the purpose basically, because you are bringing back all sorts of details, and even tiny little blemishes will become more evident. So as you do this, an interesting thing, if you click on the backslash, it'll show you where the mask, where you've painted on your mask so far. So I'm trying to get it. It allows you to be more accurate if you want it to be more accurate, which I sure do in this case. So we're going to keep doing this. And on the background, I don't really care if I spill onto the background, but the ear I'm not worried about. We're then going to go right here. The hair we do want, like the eyebrows, we do want them to be sharp, but everything else we don't. It's mostly for the eyes, but so. Let's see. There we go. If you hold down the shift key and you hit the mask, it turns it on and off, so you can kind of see with and without it. So I'm thinking we're there. Let me do one more thing. I like a lot of contrast in my images, and I like a lot of warmth. No, don't like that. So let's see, let's do another curve layer. Can we push it even more? See, is that too much? It's a little much, so, but I do like it, so I'm going to pull this back to about 50%. And that's basically it. I'm going to say that this image is done. I mean, there's other things you can do. I mean, like I just noticed in this area, I'm not too happy with that. You can see a dark spot. Again, you can go back and create another set of frequency separation, go in there, get rid of that using either the stamp on the high frequency and then on the low frequency, or doing the lasso that I showed you for the low frequency. And other than that, I'm happy with this image.